A dim corridor of shadows, rat holes of dust in corners, and piles of forgotten belongings stretching ceiling high. That's the first image that comes to mind when investigators entered the property. But what no one expected was what lay behind a wall. In a house that looked like a hoarder's worst nightmare, behind layers of trash, old furniture, stolen glances, and secrets, lay a body. A missing woman, presumed lost, was found hidden behind a secret wall. Tonight we peel back that wall, brick by brick, to tell you the untold story of Renia Lewis, her disappearance, and the monstrous truth that hid behind clutter. She vanished without warning. One moment she was texting, smiling, alive. The next, she was nowhere. Family scrambled. Law enforcement searched peaks and valleys of every possible lead, but the clues led them, impossibly, back to one place, a dirty, chaotic house in Vallejo, California. Described by some as a hoarder-style home. Cops had searched it once and found nothing. But something was wrong. Something was hidden. Something you would never notice unless you knew where to look. That's the terrifying part, the concealment. The human mind assumes walls are walls, solid, impenetrable, not prisons. But sometimes a wall is more than structure. It can be a vault, a burial place. In this case, the very structure of the house became the hiding place. The secret wall concealed a hidden attic entry, an inner cavity, where Renia's lifeless body rested, undetected, unclaimed, unknown, even while searches swirled around it. As we walk you through this case, you'll see how ordinary missives, a text left unread, a cell phone pinged, a tip followed late at night, unravel a larger horror. You'll meet the distraught mother, the family who refused to let go, the detectives who returned with new warrants, and the suspect who confessed. Every minute, every decision led them closer to that wall, and what lay behind it. This is not merely a whodunit, not a sensational headline. It is a tragedy, a life ceased, a family shattered, and a lesson. The evil that hides is often hidden in plain sight. As we walk through each scene, expect turns, misdirections, emotional ruptures, and the raw terror of discovering that you can lose someone not somewhere else, but directly behind your back. So hit subscribe, because this is a story you'll want to follow to the final frame. Stay with me as we reconstruct the timeline, explore the clues, and uncover the face behind the crime. Because behind that wall lies more than a corpse. It lies answers, pain, and a chilling reminder. Sometimes the walls we trust are exactly where the darkness hides. It was late Friday afternoon when Renia Lewis, age 28, sent her last text to a friend. The message was mundane, checking a schedule, confirming a plan, nothing that hinted at danger. But then silence fell. The replies went unanswered. At first, family thought she was simply busy, perhaps delayed. But by Saturday morning, concern bloomed. The calls, the unanswered phone, the dread. By Sunday, she was officially missing. Renia's mother, Terry Lewis, retraced every step she knew, Renia's last known location, her daily habits, her social circle. She tried calling, texting, pinging GPS apps. She even watched her daughter's Life 360 tracking, which showed a location near 14th Street in Vallejo, and gasped at the possibilities. But with each passing hour, hope faded. Days without contact, no sign of struggle, no clues. The unknown gnawed at them. Friends joined the search. Social media lit up with, "Have you seen her?" Posts, flyers went up, messages circulated, calls to police department hotlines were made. Every tip was chased. But in the chaos, the trail seemed cold. Some leads turned out false. Some tips dry. No arrest, no body. For Renia's family, the waiting was excruciating, each sunrise bringing a new heartbreak. Law enforcement entered the case with care. Detectives interviewed friends, colleagues, checked surveillance cameras in the neighborhood, car registrations, phone logs. They looked at social media posts, text records, financial transactions. They asked, who might she have met? Where had she gone? Did someone see her get into a vehicle? But despite effort, they had no break, no suspect, no location. The case remained open, dark, unresolved. Then came a faint spark. Evidence emerged. Cell phone pings placed Renia near that same Vallejo house. A school roof nearby had yielded her phone. A neighbor recalled seeing a person on that street late in the night. A tip suggested someone had recently remodeled that house, shifting walls, hiding spaces. Suddenly, the very property that seemed innocuous became centerpiece, suspicious. Could the missing woman have been there all along? And so, late Sunday, police headed to that home on 14th Street. They made a cursory search. Rooms, closets, places a person might hide. But they found nothing. The walls, the floors, every corner, blank. They left puzzled. They asked questions, but they did not know. Behind one unseen wall lay a dead woman waiting to be discovered. And only when they revisited the house, with new information, fresh search warrants, would they unearth what was hidden. The house on 14th Street didn't look evil, just neglected. Its once white siding had peeled into grayish flakes. Windows were shut tight, curtains yellowed by years of dust. The yard was overgrown, filled with discarded tires and broken lawn ornaments. When officers arrived the second time, armed with a deeper suspicion, even the air seemed heavier. What struck them first wasn't a smell or sound, but the sheer chaos. Every inch of the house was packed. Piles of boxes, plastic containers, stacks of newspapers leaning like towers ready to collapse. The kind of home where time itself seemed buried under garbage. And somewhere within those walls, a secret waited. The owner, a 61-year-old man named Jerry Wilkins, appeared nervous. He'd been questioned before, claiming he barely knew Rania, said she'd once cleaned for him. Just a few hours here and there. Detectives remembered his shaky tone, the avoidance in his eyes. But without proof, suspicion wasn't enough. This time, however, officers had a warrant, not just to glance, but to tear down if needed. As they stepped inside, they filmed every room. The body cam footage would later become infamous online, the shaky beam of a flashlight cutting through darkness, illuminating a mountain of filth. The smell grew stronger the deeper they went. Not rotting food, but something heavier, something final. Investigators moved carefully, shifting boxes, climbing over heaps of old clothing and furniture. Every step stirred clouds of dust. Every movement echoed. The hoarder's den was more labyrinth than home. One officer paused near a back hallway, noting a strange, uneven line along the drywall, as if the wall didn't belong to the original structure. A patch of fresh plaster. Paint a slightly different color. He called out, "Hey, this looks newer." The team stopped. Cameras turned. A thermal scanner picked up a cold void behind that wall, a space. A hollow section not shown in the blueprints. Could be a crawl space, one said. But the older detective, who'd seen too many things, shook his head. No, this was built after. They pried the first plank. A musty wave of air rolled out, thick, sour. Then came the smell. That undeniable, gut-twisting scent of human decay. Silence filled the room. Even the officers, hardened by years of homicide work, froze. Behind the second panel, a faint glimpse. Cloth, then hair. The wall came down slowly, methodically. And there, in that narrow cavity, no larger than a closet, lay Rania Lewis. Her body wrapped in an old blanket, face turned away, partially decomposed. The dim flashlight beam trembled across her features, revealing the unmistakable necklace her mother had described. One officer whispered, "We found her." The radio crackled. The camera recorded. Outside, sirens gathered again on 14th Street, neighbors peering from porches in disbelief. The missing woman, the posters, the prayers, all ended behind a false wall, inside a hoarder's tomb. As her body was carefully lifted from the darkness, something inside every officer shifted. For months, she'd been less a person, more a file, a case number, an image on a bulletin board. Now she was real again, tragically real. They looked at her with a mix of sorrow and anger. Sorrow for her fate, anger for what she endured. Somewhere in that cluttered home, her killer stood trembling, claiming he didn't know. But walls don't build themselves. Secrets don't seal themselves in plaster. And now the truth was leaking through every crack. The discovery changed everything. By the time the coroner's van arrived, the neighborhood was surrounded by police tape and flashing lights. Reporters gathered, drones buzzed overhead, and curious neighbors whispered Renia's name like a ghost had returned. Inside the command van, detectives sat across from Jerry Wilkins, the man who had lived in that nightmare house. His hands trembled, his shirt stained with dust and sweat. At first he said nothing. The air inside the small room was suffocating. Outside, the crime scene teams carried evidence bags, a blanket, tools, duct tape, a hammer, each item speaking louder than his silence. Detective Laura Jennings leaned forward, her tone calm but sharp. "Jerry, the wall didn't build itself. Someone placed her there. That someone was you? He shook his head. No, I didn't kill her. She came over, we argued. She fell. His voice cracked. He stared at his hands like they might offer him a better answer. I panicked, he muttered, barely audible. But panic doesn't explain construction. It doesn't explain nails, plaster, paint, all neatly covering a cavity no one was meant to find. Laura kept pressing, her voice steady, her eyes locked. Then tell me, Jerry, who helped you? Hours stretched. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome of guilt. Jerry's words kept shifting. First denial, then accident, then fear. She slipped, he said. I didn't mean it. I just wanted to hide her until I could think. But detectives had already uncovered receipts from a hardware store. Drywall, screws, joint compound, all bought the morning after Renia vanished. His story collapsed like the wall he built. Still, he begged, I didn't want her gone. She yelled, I lost control. I thought she was still breathing. Each word landed like a knife, twisting in the hearts of those listening from behind the glass. Renia's mother waited in the hallway of the station, clutching her daughter's photo. She didn't scream or curse. She just sat there, quiet, drained. When officers told her the truth, she nodded once, as if she'd already known. She was always too kind, she whispered. She thought everyone could be fixed. The cameras caught that moment later, her tears falling silently as she said, Now maybe I can bring her home. The interview room, the evidence, the confession, all of it became secondary to that image. A mother finally knowing where her daughter had gone. Back in the room, Jerry finally looked up. His voice was hoarse, defeated. She came to get money I owed her. I told her to leave. She screamed at me. I pushed her. She hit the table. I thought she was okay, but she wasn't moving. A long pause. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, so I hit her. I didn't want to see what I'd done. He looked toward the floor as if the ghosts under his home were watching. No excuses left, no hiding left. Just the weight of truth crushing what little remained of him. The interrogation ended with a confession, but not with closure. Detectives left the room in silence, exhausted by what they'd heard. Outside, cameras captured Jerry being led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, lips trembling. The street lights cast long shadows on the pavement, the same way they had on the night Renia disappeared. The world finally knew the truth, but it felt hollow, incomplete. Because justice could punish the man, but it couldn't rebuild what he had taken. Somewhere in that silence, viewers are left wondering, how many walls and how many houses hide stories just like this one? As the confession was logged and Jerry Wilkins was taken into custody, the real work began. Detectives from the Solano County Sheriff's Office and forensic teams re-entered the house, determined to find every trace that could explain the final hours of Renia's life. What they found went beyond horror. It was a chronicle of obsession and neglect. Piles of magazines, decades old, unopened mail, and hundreds of discarded objects lined every corner. But beneath that mess lay something darker, evidence that Renia hadn't simply fallen. There were signs of struggle. A broken lamp, hair strands, and faint blood spatter beneath the table leg. The accident story was falling apart fast. In one room, investigators found a small desk covered with notes, Jerry's handwriting, shaky and erratic. Phrases like, she wouldn't stop yelling, I had to shut her up, and no one will find her, were scrawled across torn envelopes and scrap paper. Those fragments painted a clearer picture than any confession could. The man had panicked, yes, but he had also calculated. He bought materials, built a false wall, and went about his life as if nothing had happened, while her body decomposed just a few feet away. Outside, crime scene technicians searched the backyard and garage. They uncovered Renia's purse, phone case, and a half-burned set of clothes hidden behind an old refrigerator. Each discovery stripped another layer of Jerry's lies. The timeline became painfully clear. The confrontation, the fatal blow, the frantic cover-up, the fake calm afterward. Every item, every smear, every note became a voice shouting what Renia herself could no longer say. Her truth was now being told through evidence. When detectives reviewed surveillance footage from nearby streets, they saw Jerry's old pickup truck driving out early morning after the murder to a hardware store where he'd purchased drywall and paint. The timestamp matched perfectly with the time Renia's phone stopped sending signals. That single detail, caught in grainy footage, became the chain that tied every lie together. It wasn't panic anymore. It was choice. Cold, deliberate concealment born out of fear and cowardice. At the forensics lab, analysts studied the wall section that once imprisoned Renia. The plaster bore fingerprints matching Jerry's right hand. The wooden beams showed signs of recent cutting, and traces of joint compound still carried his DNA. Even the brush strokes from the paint matched the roller found in his kitchen sink. Science turned his last refuge into a confession carved in wood and concrete. The wall, once his shield, now stood as his loudest accuser. By the end of the week, the case was airtight. Yet the atmosphere around the station wasn't victory. It was sorrow. Detectives gathered quietly around Renia's framed photo, candles flickering beside it. They'd solved a crime, but no one celebrated. The haunting thought lingered. How many other missing people lay behind walls and basements, under floors, hidden by the same human instinct to cover guilt with silence? As the camera fades to black, the narrator's voice lowers. Renia's story doesn't end here, because what investigators found next would unravel everything they thought they knew. 3 days after the discovery, detectives continued combing through the house, every room, every drawer, every forgotten box. That's when a female investigator, Officer Dana Cruz, found something that shifted the entire tone of the investigation. A worn, floral-patterned journal wedged under a sofa cushion. The name Renia was scribbled across its cover in pen, the ink smudged but still readable. The diary wasn't just a record. It was a confession of fear. Page after page told a story police hadn't known, one that painted Jerry Wilkins not just as a panicked killer, but as a predator who'd been slowly closing in on his victim for months. Renia had written about cleaning Jerry's home as part of a neighborhood program, how he'd seemed lonely, harmless, just a messy old man. But as the entries progressed, her tone changed. She described him becoming clingy, possessive, and increasingly unstable. "He watches me work," one line read. "Sometimes he blocks the doorway and asks strange questions." In another, she mentioned trying to quit but feeling guilty because he has no one else. Her last entry, dated March 9th, sent chills down the investigator's spines. "He got angry today. Said I was laughing at him. I think I need to stop going there." She never wrote again after that. The journal transformed the investigation. It showed premeditation, an escalating obsession that ended in violence. Prosecutors began piecing together a narrative of manipulation. Jerry had grown fixated on Renia, mistaking kindness for affection. When she finally drew boundaries, he couldn't handle rejection. The argument turned deadly. What he called a moment of panic was actually months of twisted attachment and control boiling over. The diary, fragile and ink-stained, became the heart of the case. Renia's final voice speaking from beyond the grave. At the press conference, Detective Laura Jennings held up the small pink notebook before reporters. Her voice cracked only once when she said, Renia documented her fear. She tried to leave, but she never got the chance. The cameras clicked. News anchors repeated her words across every channel that night. Social media exploded with heartbreak and outrage. Strangers lit candles, shared Renia's photos, and demanded tougher checks on known hoarders and isolated individuals living in dangerous conditions. The case had gone from local tragedy to national headline, not just because of the horror, but because of how easily it could have been prevented. Meanwhile, Jerry sat in county jail, staring blankly at the gray wall opposite his cell. Reporters described him as emotionless, detached, but in interrogation notes, officers recorded a strange phrase he repeated again and again. "She was the only one who didn't judge me." Those words echoed through the halls of the station like a curse. For him, Renia had been light in his decaying world. For her, he'd become darkness she couldn't escape. It wasn't love. It was loneliness turned into poison. When detectives returned the diary to Renia's mother, she held it to her chest and whispered, "This is all I have left of her." The camera pans on that trembling notebook, the faint handwriting visible under dim light. The narrator's voice softens. In that small book, Renia left behind her fear, her strength, and her warning. But what investigators were about to uncover next proved that even after death, the house still had more secrets to reveal. The screen fades to black. the sound of turning pages echoing like whispers from the past. Even after Jerry's arrest and the diary's discovery, investigators couldn't shake an eerie feeling, like the house itself wasn't done speaking. Detectives described it as restless, a place where silence felt alive. After the forensic team completed their first sweep, a technician named Mark Holloway noticed something strange on the blueprints. The house had been modified twice, once officially and once undocumented. There was a discrepancy between the internal dimensions and the foundation's outer line. In other words, there was more space than the rooms accounted for. "Something's off," he muttered. And just like that, the nightmare began again. They returned to 14th Street on a cold, gray morning. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the sour odor of decay still lingered. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team scanned the floors and walls, searching for irregular cavities. Near the back of the house, behind the same hallway where Rania had been found, a second hollow zone appeared. Not as large as the first, but definitely there. The team exchanged nervous glances. "You think he—" one whispered. The lead investigator only said, "We won't know until we open it." The cameras rolled. The silence in the video feels endless. Just the scrape of tools, the creak of old wood, and then a metallic clang. When they pried open that section, they didn't find another body. But what they did find was enough to freeze blood. Inside the narrow space was a collection of women's items, jewelry, scarves, shoes, and old photos. Dozens of them. None belonged to Rania. Some were dated years back. One photo, yellowed and cracked, showed a woman smiling beside a younger Jerry. Taken in the 1980s. Written on the back, "To Jerry. Love always, M." Investigators now had a horrifying possibility to consider. Was Rania his only victim, or just the last? Detectives contacted missing persons units across California. A few of the items matched cold cases from the 1990s. Women who'd vanished under mysterious circumstances, their disappearances never solved. Though no other remains were found in the home, the evidence suggested a pattern. A man who'd lived among ghosts, collecting memories of those who disappeared. Each item, each hidden trinket was a relic of his secret world. It wasn't just a hoarder's house anymore. It was a shrine of the forgotten. Psychologists were brought in to study Jerry's behavior. Their findings were chilling. They described a pathological loneliness, a man who replaced human connection with possession. He didn't just hoard objects, he hoarded control. Every room in that house reflected a piece of his decaying mind. Chaos, obsession, denial. To him, walls weren't boundaries. They were safes. And inside those safes, he stored not valuables, but fragments of people who once existed in his orbit. Rania's murder wasn't random. It was inevitable. By the time the final inspection ended, the house was sealed off. A legal crime scene that would never again be lived in. Reporters called it the house that wouldn't stay quiet. Locals crossed the street to avoid walking past it. At night, the yellow police tape fluttered in the wind like ghostly ribbons. And for the detectives, the echoes of that hollow wall never left their minds. The narrator's voice lowers. The dead were gone, but the house kept whispering their names. And as prosecutors prepared for trial, one haunting question remained. Who was the woman in that old photograph? 6 months after the discovery, the case of State versus Jerry Wilkins opened in a packed courtroom. The air inside buzzed with curiosity and dread. Every seat filled with journalists, family members, and strangers who had followed the story from the start. Jerry entered wearing a plain beige jumpsuit, head down, eyes dull, his once trembling hands now lifeless at his sides. The moment he took the stand, flashes from cameras filled the room. Across the aisle sat Rania's family, her mother clutching the same diary that had become her daughter's voice. For them, this wasn't justice. It was survival, the only way to make sense of something senseless. Prosecutors began with hard facts. The receipts, the forensics, the confession. They showed photos of the false wall, the construction tools, and the diary pages. But then they presented the item that changed everything, the photograph found in the second cavity. The woman smiling beside a young Jerry. Her name, they revealed, was Margaret Allen, missing since 1989, a case that had gone cold decades ago. Gasps filled the courtroom. Margaret had lived 2 streets away from Jerry back then. The similarities were disturbing: a kind neighbor, sudden disappearance, no trace. The coincidence was too heavy to ignore. Detectives from the old case were called in to testify. They recounted how Margaret vanished one summer night after telling a friend she was visiting a man from down the street. Back then, Jerry had been questioned briefly but released. No evidence, no body, just rumors. Now, with her photograph hidden among Renia's belongings, the past had clawed its way back. The prosecutor's voice trembled slightly when she said, "The house on 14th Street didn't just take one woman. It took 2 generations of silence." The jurors listened, visibly shaken. Defense attorneys tried to argue mental instability. They painted Jerry as a lonely recluse, mentally ill, incapable of premeditated harm. He didn't understand what he was doing, they said. He was drowning in his own filth and confusion. But the evidence told a different story, one of preparation, concealment, and awareness. When shown images of Renia's body hidden behind the wall, even the defense couldn't maintain eye contact. The courtroom fell into a silence so deep you could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Outside, protesters gathered holding signs reading "Justice for Renia" and "No more hidden victims." The media labeled Jerry a collector of sorrow. Psychiatrists testified that he had likely committed similar acts in the past, feeding off control and secrecy. But the most powerful moment came from Renia's mother, Terry, who took the stand with trembling hands. She looked straight at Jerry and said softly, "You lived with her body for months. You heard the silence you created every night, and you still slept." Her words broke the courtroom. Reporters would later write, that single sentence hit harder than any evidence. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. Jerry showed no reaction. He simply looked ahead, lips pressed tight, as if he'd already vanished inside his own walls again. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, washing the courthouse steps as if cleansing something far deeper than stone. The narrator's voice fades in. Justice was served. But the story wasn't over, because even after the trial, the ghosts of that house refused to rest. The verdict may have closed the courtroom chapter, but outside those walls, the story refused to end. The house on 14th Street sat alone, boarded up, silent, yet alive with a strange energy. Locals said it looked different now, as if the structure itself had sagged under the weight of its secrets. The property was marked for demolition, but every time workers entered, something stopped them. Collapsing floors, strange noises, electrical failures. "It's like it doesn't want to die," one contractor muttered. Reporters returned to the street, calling it the house that breathes at night. City officials finally ordered a full teardown. But before bulldozers arrived, forensic teams made one last sweep, more for protocol than expectation. What they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Hidden inside the insulation of the attic, stuffed inside a rusted tin box, were dozens of Polaroid photographs, women, objects, corners of rooms, all blurred and haunting. None were dated, but handwriting on the backs hinted at years of obsession. Beautiful smile. She stayed longer this time. Safe now. Every photo was evidence of a life Jerry had watched, fixated on, long before Renia. Investigators spent months cross-referencing the faces in those photos. Some women were located, alive, unaware they'd ever been watched. Others matched missing person reports spanning decades. It was clear Jerry had been collecting victims of loneliness long before he killed one. He didn't need to harm all of them to possess them, just to photograph, to keep, to hide. The house wasn't a crime scene anymore. It was a museum of stolen privacy. Every picture is a secret he never got to finish, said one detective. The idea haunted them. Meanwhile, Renia's family tried to rebuild their lives. Her mother moved away from Vallejo, leaving behind the home filled with reminders of her daughter. In interviews, she said, "I don't want to remember how she died. I want to remember how she lived." But the world wouldn't let her forget. True crime podcasts, documentaries, even streaming shows began dissecting the case, turning Renia's tragedy into public fascination. Some called it closure. Others called it exploitation. For her family, it was just noise. More voices talking over the silence her absence had left behind. When demolition finally began, cameras recorded the moment the first wall came down. Dust filled the air like ash. But before the structure collapsed completely, workers noticed something. Faint writing etched inside the wooden frame, words carved by hand. It read, "I never meant to hurt her. I just wanted her to stay." The message, likely Jerry's, stopped everyone in their tracks. The house, even in its destruction, had one final confession to give. The writing was photographed, preserved, and sealed in evidence. Then the bulldozers roared, and the last remnants of 14th Street fell. When the dust settled, the ground where the house once stood looked oddly peaceful, just a patch of dirt, framed by police tape. But locals swear that on quiet nights they still see a single light flicker where the hallway used to be. Some call it superstition, others call it guilt echoing through the wood and soil. The narrator's voice lowers. The house may be gone, but stories like this never really end. They linger, in memory, in fear, and in the walls we build to hide our own darkness. Months passed, but the story refused to fade. Social media became a shrine of her memory. Old photos, smiling portraits, short videos where Renia laughed without knowing she'd become an icon of tragedy. Her name began trending again when the documentary Behind the Wall released on Netflix. The series showed the haunting images from the hidden room, the dusty dolls, the secret carvings. Millions watched, cried, and speculated. But while the world consumed her pain as entertainment, Renia's family felt the weight of grief growing heavier. Every click, every episode, every comment reopened the wound they were trying to heal. True crime fans debated theories. Some claimed Jerry wasn't the only one involved. Others believed Renia had discovered something more sinister hidden inside that house, something that cost her life. Reddit threads exploded with blurry screenshots, voices whispering in videos, and supposed EVP recordings of her spirit. Conspiracy or truth? No one knew. What people forgot was that behind every viral case was a real girl, not a character, not a headline, but someone who once had dreams, friends, and plans that never saw the light of day. A year later, a memorial service was held in the same city park where Renia used to jog. Hundreds came carrying white candles and wearing blue ribbons, her favorite color. Her mother stood on the stage, voice trembling yet strong, saying, "If you remember her, don't remember her fear. Remember her kindness." Cameras flashed, drones hovered, but for a few moments there was silence, the kind that felt sacred. A wind passed through the trees and many swore they felt something soft and warm brush against them. Like a presence saying goodbye, that night, one of the documentary filmmakers visited the ruins of the demolished house, now fenced and empty. He placed a single candle on the dirt and recorded a final shot for his film. But when reviewing the footage later, something impossible appeared. A faint reflection of a woman's silhouette in the camera lens, standing where the wall once hid her. The face was blurred, unrecognizable, but the outline matched Renia's last known photograph. Was it coincidence? A trick of light? Or something the world wasn't meant to see? In the following weeks, small acts of remembrance appeared all over the city. A mural of Renia was painted downtown, her face half in shadow, half in sunlight, with the words, "Let the truth breathe." Strangers left flowers, letters, even drawings of walls cracking open with light. Each tribute seemed to whisper the same message. Her story was no longer buried. It had become a symbol, not of horror, but of unseen suffering, of lives that disappear behind closed doors. Her ghost wasn't haunting the world anymore. She was teaching it to look closer. The narrator's voice softens. Sometimes justice isn't a verdict. It's a story that refuses to be silenced. The camera pans out, showing the empty lot bathed in moonlight, the flicker of a candle still glowing against the wind. Maybe that's what Renia wanted all along. Not revenge, not pity. Just to be found. A pause. And now that she has been, the world will never forget the girl behind the wall. The scene fades to black, leaving a question lingering in every viewer's mind. How many more are still hidden, waiting to be seen? 2 years after Renia's discovery, the case became a chapter in the world's collective memory. Studied by criminologists, analyzed by journalists, whispered by ordinary people in fear. But while the headlines had moved on, the echoes of that hidden room lingered in unexpected ways. A new family bought the plot where the old house once stood, unaware of its past. When they began construction, strange things started happening. Tools went missing. Radios turned on by themselves. And late at night, the new owner claimed he could hear scratching sounds beneath the floorboards, as if the earth itself was remembering. Investigators dismissed the reports as paranoia. But curiosity grew online again when one worker shared a photo, faint impressions like fingerprints pressed into the freshly poured cement foundation. Forensic analysis later revealed the pattern matched Renia's, the same fingerprints taken from the crime scene years ago. Experts called it contamination. Others called it impossible. The world called it proof the past never really buries itself. Even skeptics began to wonder. Was Renia's presence clinging to the soil, or had the truth she represented become something much bigger than her name? A local journalist revisited the story, producing a short film titled The Last Wall. In his narration, he said, "Maybe the house wasn't the monster. Maybe it was a mirror, a reflection of the secrets people hide behind ordinary doors." His words struck deep. Viewers around the world began sharing their own stories of missing relatives, unsolved disappearances, moments when they felt something watching them through the cracks of their lives. Renia's tragedy had become a movement, a reminder that the worst monsters are often the ones we never notice until it's too late. Meanwhile, Jerry's possessions were auctioned off to pay for restitution. Among them was a music box found in the secret room, still intact, still playing the same haunting lullaby Renia's mother remembered from her childhood. A collector bought it anonymously, but when he wound it up for the first time, something unexpected fell out. A small folded note hidden in the lining. It read, "If anyone finds this, please tell Mom I tried to get out." The handwriting matched Renia's. That single piece of paper reignited the entire world's grief and awe. She had tried. She had fought, and now her final message had been found. The note became the centerpiece of a museum exhibit titled Voices That Were Silenced. Thousands visited. Some cried, some prayed. Some simply stood in front of the music box and listened to the melody, tears falling as if they were hearing Renia's heartbeat in every note. Her story had transcended the crime. It became human, painful, unforgettable. People began writing letters to her, messages of apology, hope, and healing. They weren't just mourning her death. They were mourning all the unseen victims the world forgets too easily. The camera fades in on the empty ground again, the place where it all began. A whisper plays in the background, the same lullaby, faint, almost too soft to hear. The narrator's voice returns one last time. She was hidden behind a wall. But in the end, she broke through it. A pause. Not with screams, not with fear, but with truth. The screen darkens. A single white line appears across it. In memory of Renia, and all who are still waiting to be found. The music slows, leaving a silence that feels heavier than words. Sometimes the scariest walls aren't made of bricks. They're built from secrets, from silence, from fear. And if one story like this could stay hidden for years, how many more are still out there? If you believe some truth should never stay buried, hit subscribe and join me next time, because the next story might be closer than you think.